We are to agenda item number 10, our pipeline fire west flood update. You kicking us off, Ed?
Guess I'll kick it
Or
off.
you're getting kicked up here?
Guess I'll kick it off. Yeah, so thank you, and thank you for everybody sticking around this late. So Ed Shank, Stormwater Manager again, and we have Sam Beckett here, who is Incident Management, what is your name, Chief? Sure, Incident Management Chief, as well as the Street Section Supervisor. So we are going to give today a brief overview of what we have for the pipeline fire for the city section of it. As most of you well know, we did have a roughly 26,000 acre fire pipeline. A little less than 2,000 acres of that burned into watersheds that directly feed into the city. That would be the Schultz Creek watershed, as well as what we're calling the Chimney Watershed that drains, both of them drain to the Rio de Flag. So we're going to go over some of the flood modeling that was done today, or done recently by J.E. Fuller Hydrology, who worked with both the county and the city on flood hydrology and flood modeling, not just for pipeline, but also for the tunnel fire before that, museum fire in 2019, and the 2010 Schultz fire, as well as many other fires throughout the Southwest. So we have Joe Lovrich here today, who'll be speaking on that. Some of the flood modeling is very new. We've had several iterations of it in the last week and a half. Definitely been working at marathon speed here, putting in some very long hours, trying to understand what our flood risk is throughout the community, and we will touch on many of those topics today. I'm sure there'll be a good discussion as well as some good questions. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Joe, if he's ready.
Hi, Mayor and Council. My name is Joe Lovrich. I'm with J.E. Fuller. What I was going to do tonight is to take you through some of the steps of how we've been doing our analysis to date and where we're going with it. So like Ed said, this is very new modeling. So we started basically the afternoon when the fire started, and we've been going ever since. So what am I talking about with flood modeling? It's determining the increased flood risk due to the downstream areas, due to the soil, the heat effects on the soil, the fire, how the fire changed the properties of the soil that creates more runoff to the downstream areas. So the way this goes in a fire situation like this is we have preliminary flood modeling right off the bat based on fire footprints and assumptions made about what the potential burn severity could be. Burn severity maps don't come out for a period of time after a fire starts. So with there's a whole set of modeling done for the east side of the fire that we're calling, basically the whole Schultz reburn, which feeds to all the timberline watersheds, Doney Park, that whole area. There's a divide at Schultz Tank, so Schultz Creek watershed and the Chimney watershed, they feed down to Cheshire Museum down towards 180. So that's a completely independent model from the east side. So something that we had to do, we had to make some assumptions on burn severity from the get-go, and based on that, you can begin to do some initial mitigation and understanding where that flood risk is downstream. Then what happens after that, and this just came out on Saturday, is we have the burn severity maps produced by the BEAR teams, the Burned Area Emergency Response Teams with the U.S. Forest Service. So this is the rapid assessment of the soil burn severity in the watershed, which drives the increased water. Based on that, we rerun our models to predict the way we think a storm could affect the watersheds. And that's where we're at right now. So the models you'll see are hot off the press. They're very new. There's always refinements being done in them, since this is a very fast-paced process, and so they aren't final by any means, but they do give a pretty good prediction of what could happen given a certain storm in the watershed. So, next, am I driving? You're driving. Okay, so just to give you some perspective of where this lies in relation to other things, is this is just kind of a 3D view of this side of the mountain, the west side of the mountain. You can see the museum fire in the orange polygon. It feeds down towards the Sunnyside neighborhood. You see all of the watersheds. The blue lines are delineating watersheds. So those watersheds in the upper part of the screen, those all feed off to the east through Timberline, Donny Park. What I'm talking to you about tonight are these two blue lines that come down towards Cheshire. One is Schultz Creek and one is Chimney Springs. So what you can see here is that these two watersheds, the Schultz Creek watershed was a little bit impacted by the museum fire, not significantly, but there is a little bit in it. And these are independent from the watersheds that were burnt in the 19 museum fire. So there's a break there. Okay, so some stats on this. Of these two watersheds, the Chimney Watershed and the Schultz Creek Watershed, Chimney had about 34% burned. Schultz Creek had about 29% burned. Then the other percentages are how much of the watershed is either high severity, moderate, low, or very low, or no fire. So the concerning aspects that we have, and the burn severity is shown in the red and the yellow, is the moderate and high burn severity. Those are the real drivers in what happens downstream. So there's pretty significant areas within, especially the Schultz Creek watershed, that are moderate or high. So now I'm going to take you on a little, this is just a zoomed in picture of the fire. You can kind of see, to orient you, it's a little grainy, but about through the middle of the picture is where Friedland Prairie Road comes and turns, hits the Weatherford Road, if you know the area. And Schultz Tank is on the very right. You can see that little blob of where Schultz Tank is. So all this water flows downstream, and what we're interested in is how it's potentially going to impact the neighborhoods. These are very generally complacent watersheds, so you can have a big storm on them and not much happens. But in a post-fire world, you have a significant amount of water that comes down. So let's go through this from upstream to downstream. The Chimney Watershed comes in, it flows down towards 180 at the culvert that was overtopped and the road was blocked last summer, right upstream of Cheshire. That water, as it comes down, it can spread pretty wide. There's some homes potentially impacted there. That's all in the county. The county line is right on Highway 180 at that point. Once that water comes down into Cheshire, it hits the Rio de Flag. When it hits the Rio de Flag, there's quite a bit of conveyance in the Rio de Flag, right? It's a regional drainage. There's also a secondary channel called the Peak View Channel, which comes down parallel to Peak View Street. So within the city in this portion, it's not looking like there's a lot of flood risk, though there are some cautionary notes with that, in that this water, when it comes off, it's not clear water, as we all know, right? So the debris, the sediment, the rocks that can come down can quickly change the course of how these streams are flowing. And so what we try to do with this is try to predict worst case where the water may go. So these maps are being used by the city and the county to help understand. If we zoom over to Schultz Creek on the right, Schultz Creek comes down, crosses Mount Eldon Lookout Road, right past the Y. And at that point, we aren't seeing really any properties impacted by it. And that leads on down further to one of the more impacted areas. One thing to point out is this whole middle part of the map it's interesting topography because you have these two watersheds that split, and the middle portion that feeds down towards Magdalena, towards Schultz Pass Road, basically between Magdalena and the Y on Schultz Pass Road, don't have any fire effects. The fire was not in those watersheds. The other thing to point out is that when this runoff gets down to the Rio de Flag is a regional watercourse. We aren't modeling the rainfall over the entire 50 square mile watershed for this type of monsoonal type storm that we're interested in. So uncertainty in the model increases once you hit the Rio de Flag, because there are other watersheds that feed in from the south, from Fort Valley, and how storms have tracked across that before they get into the watersheds that we're modeling, it's a huge variable. And so that needs to be understood when interpreting flood risk along the Rio de Flag. So what you're looking at here is Schultz Creek as it comes down towards Fort Valley Road. Right kind of in the middle of your screen, you can see there's the fire station, if you all know where that is on Fort Valley Road. That's where Schultz Creek comes down. It has very small infrastructure that takes it over to the Rio, and that water spreads at that point. So it spreads, overtops Highway 180, and ends up having the potential to flow through Stevana and into the upper end of Coconino Estates as it's trying to get to the Rio. And that's a huge, what's happening there is you have a lot of sheet flow. You have a lot of shallow flow that doesn't have a great conveyance to get to the Rio de Flag channel. As you move on downstream, so take the first the map in the center, and then further downstream is the map to the right. As you go downstream, from this watershed that's contributing, the Rio de Flag has enough capacity in it. But like I was saying, it's hard for that water runoff to get to the Rio. And so the easiest path for that water to take is down the streets. And so unless there's diversions to get that water in the Rio upstream, you're talking to Navajo, Elizabeth, Lynn, all the way down to Meade is really potentially shallow, but covering the full street flow. Once you hit Meade, there's not enough infrastructure to carry that water, the increased flows, all the way over to the Rio, so that's when you may have some backing up and heading further down Navajo. Now, like what I said, there's a lot of, the further down you track this model, the more the uncertainty increases, because how this water flows down is a lot due to the volume of the storm, so it could be a shorter duration storm, it could be a longer. And so what we're predicting and what you're seeing here is for a 2-inch, 45-minute storm event. This is the modeling that was used on Museum, and this is really based on rainfall that has been monitored and gauged over the Schultz fire for the last 12 years. So to predict, to show kind of the storms that we've seen cause sizable flood events. And this is the downstream end of what we're modeling at this point. Rio de Flag, like I said, it's this regional watercourse. So as you take this risk further downstream, we have not tracked this all the way down through the city yet. And that's something we have a lot more discussions to do about with that. But that's the limit of what I have to show at this point. And if there's any questions or what have you.
Thank you. Council, do you have questions this time? Or we do have some public comments, but we'll save the public comments till the very end of the presentation. Councilman McCarthy.
Could you name some of the streets that are on this map? Because I can't really read them from here. It's my old eyes.
Oh, I apologize for that. So so you see the Rio de Flag, it's got the purple, right? So Navajo Drive is right adjacent to it on the east side. Then there's Talkington is the main north-south drive. Mead is the east-west road that is down towards the bottom third of the screen. And
If you could use a pointer.
hey, all right.
Yeah, put the pointer there and
What do you know?
name it.
All right. Yeah, Mead is right here. Talkington is right here. Lantern down to the ditch pool is right here. Crescent is over here. So
What's the name of the street at the bottom that goes east-west?
that's Mead right here.
The one just a block south of that is what?
This is Murray.
Okay, thank you.
Murray, and that's where this image starts. And so Murray transitions into Navajo as that goes down towards Beale and Whiting here. Kutch is right here.
So on the right side, is that Navajo that's going east-west?
No, Beale is going east-west right here.
Beale. And then I think that turns into Navajo, doesn't it?
Navajo is going north and south.
But there's two Navajos. One is north-south and one goes east-west.
Yeah, that's further south. Yeah. Fort Valley Road is right here. Yes. Fort Valley is over here.
Thank you. Any other questions, Council? Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Joe. So moving a little bit downstream, one of the questions we get fairly often is how does this impact the Rio de Flag as we move downstream? And as Joe mentioned, this is a regional watercourse. It has over 57 square miles of drainage area. So the further that we move away from that fire scar, the more uncertainty we have as we model it out. Because now we're talking about regional storms, we're talking about different storms than we usually see in these monsoon microbursts. So the further we move down, the more we're getting a contributing factor from unburned watersheds, and the burn scar becomes a smaller and smaller proportion of that. So to give some idea, roughly the amount of burn that we have in the Rio de Flag watershed is, it's well less than 10%. I'd say somewhere around the 5% range. So as we continue to move down through the city, we have less and less impact of the flows that are coming out of Schultz Creek or the Chimney Springs watershed. So we've had many discussions among the engineers, the hydrologists, the planners, and we'll continue to have those, but at least at the preliminary level, we're a little uncertain of how to model that flood risk through downtown and south side, because there's a lot of different ways that we can make assumptions as we move down. That 2-inch rain event in 45 minutes, that no longer really holds true. That's not something we can really use for a more regional level flood event. For example, on Sunday, there was some localized flooding in the downtown and south side area. That had nothing to do with pipeline fire, had nothing to do with museum fire. That was a 2-inch rain event in about half an hour on Observatory Mesa. So it was a large microburst on a completely unburned area, and we got localized flooding. So we need to be careful when we go further downstream. At the moment, what the city is recommending is that anybody that is within the 100-year floodplain, which is the FEMA floodplain that was mapped in 2010 for the majority part, which is in blue in this map, or if you're in the FEMA 500-year floodplain, which is marked in orange, we highly encourage you to get flood insurance just as backup. With that, we'll move on to the next one, which is mitigation. So what are we doing in terms of short-term mitigation? Right now, we're really focused quite a bit on that area near Highway 180. As Joe mentioned, the Schultz Creek mostly stays, or the flow mostly stays in Schultz Creek until you get down to that culvert near Station 5, fire station number 5. And then we have this backwater effect where the culvert quickly becomes overwhelmed, and we start having that sheet flow that Joe mentioned that does go through Coconino Estates. So we are looking at a number of different emergency mitigation options in this area of the map that we're showing, kind of working through a bunch of different iterations. There's a lot of complexity to it based on private landowners, also the mitigation types, and the model as it changes. The model you're looking at right now, as Joe mentioned, is, if you want to call it, fresh off the press. We've only had this for a very short amount of time. It has changed as we get better data and as the model gets more refined. So we are working through that, just so you know. Our hope is that we can do some short-term emergency mitigation measures in this area to drastically, hopefully drastically, reduce the amount of sheet flow that we see through Coconino Estates, so that we can reduce the amount of mitigation that's needed through that neighborhood. With that, I mentioned some of that mitigation that we might be looking at. Potentially, we're looking at barrier. It could be a number of other things that could work. We are reaching out to both our county partners as well as state and federal and nationwide private folks to look at different possibilities and mitigation strategies for something this complex. And with that, I'll move to the sandbag section, which Sam, if he's around, sorry.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. We appreciate the time here today. I think Ed hit on some really good pieces here, and Joe hit on probably the better scope of what we're dealing with here. A big piece of what we're looking at, yes, is the potential for the short-term mitigations, and barrier was mentioned. While it would be ideal, it's hard to come by. So we're working through that process. We've got some avenues, and honestly, we were able to shift some of the stuff that we had in backstock out to 180, and we're working in partnership with ADOT and honestly, many of the different landowners in that area to try and get mitigation in place. Again, the goal here is to streamline that water into the Rio de Flag without allowing it to get through the community first. So many items in play there. When we talk about the sandbag recommendations, one of the pieces that we want to note is always important as these modeling maps come out. We'll get them posted onto the city's website once we have a refined version, and we recommend that anybody who sees their home in potentially an impacted area protects the home. The goal behind that is protecting your doorways, windows, vents, whatever you might have or water could get under the home. That's the biggest impact here. Again, we keep using the term sheet flow. This is a much different event than what we've seen even in some of our other local events where we have that higher velocity water. We don't believe that's what we're going to be seeing here. However, it's still going to be water flowing through potentially the community. So protect the home, doorways, windows, if you have basements, any access into that basement. Sandbag mitigations are always recommended for that, and that is the piece that we'll be pushing out and working through to try and support that. We are working with our engineering consultants who have been out and talked with several of the residents who are in a higher impact area, and they're going to continue through that process. If you do meet with one of our either contracted engineers or one of our city staff, they will make sure they get you all the data you need to make the most informed decision on behalf of your own property. Many of the places where we're looking at barrier, that'll be something that we'll talk about, the cooperative agreements where we actually come in and we'll have contractors place the mitigations, the emergency mitigations for those residents if needed in those areas. Other than that, it will be simply asking residents to support each other, much like we've done with museum, is getting people out there to help build sandbags for each other, build sandbags for your home, and try and get them out there. And we'll get into the locations of some sandbag self-fill sites we've already established for what we're calling the Pipeline West. The sandbag recommendations, as you'll see on the bottom there, downtown aren't quite available yet. However, I'm going to tell people right now, if you were out Sunday and you received water and you live in the downtown area, you're probably one of those people that need to consider sandbags at this point. I think that's a fair assumption at this point. However, we can't confirm most of that. But we know from many of us who've lived here a long time where that water flows to the downtown area. One of those is just, you might see a higher frequency of that now. Protect your home, and that's the goal moving forward. So let's move on here. These are the 2 sandbag locations, self-fill sandbag locations that have already been established. They were established as of Friday last week. A huge thank you to our Public Works team who went out and got this done in a very rapid time frame. The picture on your left is at the very north end of Aztec, over by the sports complex, the softball fields for any of the locals around here. So this would be kind of the back way into there on the east side of the fields. The other location is going to be out off of Schultz Pass Road and Mount Eldon Lookout Road at the Y. Many people who live here have recreated in that area. You'll see we have a ton of cinders out there, empty sandbags, self-fill stations that are established. There should be shovels at each site, and those are open for anybody who feels as if they need sandbags. And as these models come out and as people go through the slides in the packets from today, if you see your home identified in there, the recommendation is protection of the home. And these are the locations that we can get those resources out to the residents. Emergency notifications. Much like we've done with every incident, emergency notifications will be a vital piece of this. Having said that, they only work if you register for them. IPAWS alerts are very sensitive alerts. So IPAWS is the Integrated Public Alert Warning System. It is an option. That is more like the Amber Alerts that people get. You don't have to opt into that. It can be driven through the cell phone towers that you're closest to, and you will get that alert whether you've opted in or not. However, that is a FEMA managed system where the county has authorization to use. The best way to get notifications is to register for the system. If you live anywhere within the Cheshire communities, Coconino Estates, Coyote Springs, Anasazi Ridge, anywhere along that northern piece of 180, our recommendation is to just register for the notifications, if nothing else, to have the information, to know if you can drive into town that day if 180 is not impacted. So we're not causing additional burden on the first responders and our public works and ADOT crews that'll be out there working. All of the alert system, like you'll hear from the county, is a very confidential system. All the data that goes in there stays in that system. You won't have to worry about that. So it's a very good system to get good information from and have a better understanding of what potential impacts might come to your area. And this system is recommended for anybody. Most of what you're going to see here are the alerts, and the messaging that we're going to be putting out is basically a shelter in place. We don't see water here where we're going to see the need for massive evacuations. That is usually the first thing we don't want to do in a flood event, is put people out in the waters. So the goal is to protect your homes, make sure that they are safe enough to build a shelter in place. That is the goal here. If we do get to a point where we have evacuations, it's a whole nother process, and that is not a piece that we're looking at this point. So the expectation is if we have water, please stay home. If you live in Cheshire and you are not affected by the water and we see water on 180, please stay home. Don't add to the burden of traffic on the road. So these emergency notifications will be vital in notifying everybody in a timely fashion of what impacts we may or may not see moving forward. Do we have any questions on that piece of it? Okay. And I'm going to hand this back over to Ed to talk about the rain gauges and notifications.
Thank you, Sam, and I can't emphasize enough Sam's last slide. Really, that Coconino emergency alert system is kind of premier. That's what you should be hitting. You may also be seeing National Weather Service alerts, but those tend to be a little bit more regional in nature. Also very good to pay attention to. This slide's a little bit more what I'd call it your do-it-yourself, if you will. I don't recommend it as a do-it-yourself for emergency alerts. It's not what it's meant for. This is if you want to take a look at real-time rain or stream gauge data, we have that capability. You can go to that website on the left. Also, if you want to get email notifications, you can sign up for whatever gauges you want, whether it's in the post-fire burn area or whether it's somewhere else in another section of the county or city on that right. And that will give you an email notification if you get 1 inch of rain within 1 hour. Again, these do not replace or in any way supplement what those emergency notifications are. This is more if you're just looking for information for yourself at that point. With that, I'll move on to Sarah.
Thanks, Ed, and good evening, Mayor and Council. Sarah Langley again, Public Affairs Director. Just wanted to hit on the flood insurance message a bit more. As Ed mentioned, we are recommending flood insurance for anyone who's currently in a FEMA floodplain in the impacted watersheds. We do have a mailer going out to those properties. It should be delivered around the end of this week, just to make sure we do reach everyone with that message. Residents can visit fema.gov/flood-insurance for more information. You can also talk to whoever sells you your home insurance or your car insurance, renter's insurance, things like that. The main message is flood insurance is generally separate from your existing policy. We have gotten a lot of questions about the 30-day waiting period for flood insurance and the potential of waiving that due to a wildfire. So it's important to note that that waiver is a FEMA decision. The city is not involved in that, the county's not involved in that. That's a FEMA decision, and it's made at the time of a claim, so it is event dependent. So if, during a 30-day waiting period, your property is flooded due to a, random monsoon storm, that's not going to qualify for a waiver. However, if the flooding that impacted your property is due to or, related to post-wildfire conditions on federal lands, and the policy has been purchased within 60 days of the wildfire containment date, you might be eligible for the waiver of the 30 days. Just to note, we're currently at 90% containment with the pipeline fire, so we don't yet have a containment date, so still a great time to purchase flood insurance, but that is a FEMA decision, and if residents have questions about that waiver, they can ask their insurance agents to reach out to FEMA for more information. Next slide, so just wanted to touch on communications related to, as we're calling, Pipeline Fire West. We've stood up a preliminary website, flagstaff.az.gov/pipelinewest. So you can visit that. On that website, we've set up a form so you can enter your name and your email address, and we will add you to our list of residents so that we can send out email updates to you. Those aren't emergency notifications. They're more, we'll let you know when we're having a council update. We'll let you know if there are revised flood maps. We'll let you know about sandbags, things like that. So if you're a resident and you're curious to get updates, please go to that website and sign up to get on our list. And then lastly, if you have a specific question or maybe you're a member of the media, please feel free to shoot me an email right there on screen, sarah.langley@flagstaffaz.gov. We'll likely be putting together a frequently asked questions document, and we'll distribute that widely so we can make sure everyone's questions are answered. So that's it from me. We don't have a last slide, but Mayor, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. With that, I'm going to turn it to public participation. And we do have Oksana Dressler. Oksana Dressler?
She may have stepped out or left, Mayor.
Okay. Do we have anyone online?
No, Mayor, it does not appear that we do.
Okay. Well, I'll hold on to this card. If you see her, then we can have her jump in. But in the meantime, we'll have see if council has any questions regarding the presentation. All right. Well, with that, we can just move right along here to the next agenda item. Thank you, everyone.